Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Angelica Rosado, and I'm a member of the social committee from the Puerto Rico Society of Microbiologists. Thank you for joining us today. This webinar series is called MicroVision Talks Career Path Development, and is designed to guide microbiology professionals through various career opportunities and offering expert advice, networking tips, and strategies for success in the field. Today, we have María José Sosa. She is currently based in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and she's a dedicated researcher at the University of Minnesota. With a bachelor's degree in neuroscience, earned magna cum laude from the University of Texas at Dallas, Maria has an impressive track record of combining cutting-edge research with impactful community engagement. Maria's expertise lies in advancing our understanding of the brain vascular dysfunction, particularly Alzheimer's-related conditions such as cerebral myeloid angiopathy. At the same time, she was a laboratory manager and research associate at the Seattle Children's Research Institute. And beyond her research, she has contributed significantly to mentorship programs, inspiring students from underserved communities to pursue STEM careers. And she's an active member of organizations like SACNAS, a published scientist and a recipient of the NIH Diversity Supplement Award. Maria has delivered numerous presentations at prestigious conferences and meetings, including the Society for Neuroscience and the Blood-Brain Barrier meeting. And with us, here you have with her presentation titled The Unseen Path, Embracing Flexibility in Your Scientific Career Journey. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, Angelica, for that introduction. So I'm just gonna talk to you a little bit about my journey. I'm very excited to be here and share a little bit about me and hope that it will help anybody that has any questions about how to navigate their scientific career. I'm no expert by any means. I'm still learning as I go, but I am willing to share my experience with anybody that asks. So, um, just to give you a little bit of background, I actually was born and raised in Mexico, Matamoros, Tamaulipas, Mexico. Um, my family and I lived in a very small town in the border. So if you imagine the Gulf of Mexico, we were right in the corner between the US and Mexico. And this city was particularly small, but even then it had a big population because there were a lot of immigrants there. Um, I started education there. I went to elementary, high school, middle school, all of that there. And there was nothing, and this is a little bit of context because there was not much about science that was involved in my life. I was in some things, extracurriculars, but I never was like, oh my God, I'm in love with science. Science is the best thing. So it's okay if, it has not been a thing for you since you're really, really young. But whenever I finished high school or whenever I was going to finish high school, I thought that because I had good grades and because I really enjoy um, like hard quote unquote courses, the obvious next step was school of medicine. And so I actually applied and got accepted to school of medicine in Mexico. But because of some things with our city and being a border town and it being pretty dangerous to live there day by day because of narcotraficantes and such, we ended up moving to the US. And so all the things that I had planned, going to med school and like finishing in the next 6 years and then going to internship, because over there you don't really have to do an undergrad between, vanished in a way. And so I started my undergrad career, and started my process moving from Mexico to the United States. So, being said, my first university was right in the border. So it didn't feel super different. There were still a lot of Mexicans because a lot of people, since it was right there, would go to college over there. So, it was still the same kind of culture, the same, maybe not language, because in school you would have to speak English, but with people you didn't. Everybody knew Spanish most of the times. Um, and I actually started to pursue med school again in the US. It's so different, and it's um, a lot more steps that if you don't know in advance feel very cumbersome. And in taking my prereqs like Bio 1, I actually bumped into Dr. Saudou Rahman, who is still their faculty. He's an associate professor, and he saw that I really enjoyed his class, which was biology, and he was like, "Hey, I'm opening a lab. Would you want to come join?" But at that point, I had no idea what that meant. I knew that, for example, my brother, that is 10 years older than me, had been in labs and he went that route, but I didn't know what it meant for me at all. I had never met anybody that had been in the research lab. But I said, why not? Maybe this will lead to a job. I was trying to work as well. So I said yes. And so it's funny because I was doing an undergrad in biology. And this lab was marine biology. It was to study the low levels of oxygen in the coast, because, with climate change and the petrol industry that has just gotten worse. And so hypoxia is seen more in marine species. So it was something that I had never heard. It was something that I never knew about, but I just loved it so much. It was a process of collecting samples, reading about it, learning how to use a microscope, not only like for anatomy classes, but also to see tissue and to look for specific things that I had stained. And that kind of piqued my interest. I still was trying to pursue med school at that point, but research started to be like, huh, this is cool. This is interesting. I had never heard of it, but I think I'll enjoy it. And I ended up deciding to transfer to the University of Texas at Dallas because they had way more opportunities. My first university was pretty new. It had gone through a merger process, so there was not a lot of things that I could do there, and I ended up transferring. And my first thing was, instead of trying to pursue med school, it kind of like went on the back, and I was like, okay, let's do more research to see what's all about. And the first lab that I joined is the Texas Biomedical Device Center. So there, the whole point of the research that we did, at least in our division, was to improve sensory and motor disabilities that came from trauma, like traumatic brain injury, spinal cord injury. And there I really dive deep into what a whole lab is, because there was microconstruction of devices, there was surgery, there was staining, there was coding, there was behavioral training. So that is what really was like, okay, I think I'm gonna forget about med school and I'm gonna dive very, very deep into this. And with that opportunity, I was able to meet some people that told me about a program with a local medical center, which is the one listed, Green Fellowship Program at UT Southwestern Medical Center. So there it's, I would say in Dallas, Texas, it's the biggest medical center we have, if not the only one that actually does have a bunch of research. And that was an experience of working 9 to 5 in the lab, having your own project, having direct contact with the PI, not just the grad students that work there, not just like other undergrads, just being kind of like a grad student without going into grad school. And unfortunately, that experience made me steer away from research for a bit because I had been in environments in which the people I work with were very supportive, were willing to teach me how to do things, were willing to put the hours to train me. But in this specific lab, everybody had a lot to do already. So I didn't really get much mentorship. If anything, I kind of was left to my own, and that part of research scared me. Not because I didn't think I could take it on my own, but because it's not what I was looking for. Um, and to this day, that has been a big lesson. Okay, if I go somewhere else, this is the things that I want from like off the bat. And then in that same university, I also did some psychology lab. So at some point, I was so into research that I was into labs at the same time. And that was the Blackberry lab and the Texas Biomedical Advanced Center. But Blackberry was very different. It was trying to get at what causes some trends of behavior in teenagers, what through codifying their conversation. So it was a whole project, and I was like, okay, this is not for me, but at least now I know. So after undergrad, because of this last experience with the Green Fellowship program, I was like, okay, I used to think I really wanted med school. Now I don't know. I used to think I really wanted to go into research. I don't know either. What do I do? And so I just graduated, applied for some jobs, and I ended up landing a very unexpected position as a surgery and pathology lab coordinator in a skin cancer clinic. And I think this, um, it's an ongoing cycle that is what relates to the title. Is just I started to try to not control my path as much as I was trying to embrace change and being flexible and saying, okay, these are the skills that I have, these are the transferable things that I have. Let me see with this and the things that I will learn as I go. Where do I see myself going? Where do I fit in? Where do I want to fit in? And if I don't fit in, what do I need to get where I want to be? And so this experience was a full clinic. There were medical assistants, there were nurses, there were people that scheduled patients. But my job was to make sure that all the patients that were going to have surgery to remove skin cancer, I knew what they were coming in for. We're not scared, we're ready. That the schedule for the surgeons that we had made sense so that they could go, because the way it worked is like the surgeon goes to one room, does a layer, hoping that, that layer removes all the skin cancer, then goes to another room, does the same. And then in between, he goes into the lab where the tissue is being processed to see if the borders or the margins are clear of skin cancer. And then if they are, he can go and close that spot. If not, he has to go in again. So it needs a lot of coordination. It needs all the pieces of the puzzle being or working very, very nicely together. So that was one of my jobs. And then the other job, which I did not start with, but got into since I had done a lot of histology in the previous labs, which histology, if you don't know, it's the processing of tissue through different agents to stain for specific markers. Um, since I had done that in the past, I started doing it, just covering here and there. And at some point, I was running the lab. And I think I was 23. So it was a lot of responsibility, but I enjoyed that responsibility. And although I was pretty happy with this job, I still missed science. So at some point during the pandemic, I was like, okay, I know that I can direct and be a leader, and now I have all these transferable soft and hard skills, can I go back into research? And so that's where I went to Seattle Children's Research Institute, um, which was a life-changing position. So I started as a research assistant, which is, as you might know, kind of like the lower end of positions in a lab whenever you're not an undergrad or a part-time assistant. And the advantage of this lab, and something that I think if you want to go into research, you should go for or look for, was that the principal investigator, Andy, he was very willing for like to give everybody their own project, whether you are RA, whether you are a grad student. Of course, grad students need to have a project, but like if you are not in school trying to get a degree, you would still get your own project and still feel like a grad student, in the sense of you had autonomy, you could decide where to go with, your questions, as long as you were working with a postdoc, which we had a lot of. And in that same lab, we also had responsibilities. So we had the admin responsibilities, like, for example, some people did ordering, some people did biohazard waste disposal, some people did inventory. And so with that, you were able to balance doing science, a full project, and also doing those tasks. But also, you got to collaborate because every single person that had a project had different expertise. And with those expertise, they're like, okay, I know I can do this, but I need somebody that can do this part. Can you help? And so through that lab, I was able to be not all published, but at least six papers, just because I was very involved in helping everybody. And I just started getting more into trying to make the lab a better place for everybody, not just, making everybody feel welcome, but also organization wise and also administrative wise. And that's when I had a conversation with my PI and I was like, hey, I know that I have not been here this long, but I think I can take on more responsibility, but I would hope and would like for that responsibility to come with a raise or with a different title, which is how I became a research associate, which is the title that you have in the institute, at least, to be the lab manager. And I started getting more into seeing how grants are written, how the PI interacts with other people to get things done, to do ordering, to fix apparatuses, to organize retreats. And so we were able to have a lot of things done, also taking weight from him and making everything work better for everybody. Um, and the person in the picture is a postdoc that I worked closely with. And she was very receptive and she was willing to help me grow and give me more the moment that I needed more, but without putting too much pressure on me or putting too much work on me. So this institute, this experience really helped me be like, okay, you can be back in research and you can do all these things. And another thing is, I constantly had this struggle of, okay, do I need to do grad school or not to continue growing in research? This position also shows me that I don't. And I still think about it sometimes. But I think grad school is a really good tool if you want to become a PI or if you really, really want to be an expert in a specific topic, maybe go into industry. But I think you can also build your own path because sometimes it's just not in within your possibilities to be 5 years in an institution with minimal pay while you're trying to build your own home, build your own future, build your own wealth. And just to go a little bit into what I did at the Institute science wise, I have some pictures here that back here, let me see if I can use the laser. Oh, I can't, so I'll just use the cursor. So here is the two photon microscope. It's not all of it by any means. That microscope takes half of a whole room. Um, and then this QR code is a QR code for the Chi Lab website. If you're interested, I'm going to leave it there for a few seconds if you want to scan. But two photon microscopy was the main method of research, is, if you will, in this lab. And with this type of microscopy, aided with immunohistochemistry, we were able to assess pathology and perivascular serotypes within the microvasculature. So what do I mean by this? Is just the brain vessels that are in the brain. Sorry, the brain vessels that are very, very tiny up here, veins, arteries, arterioles, venules, and capillaries, and all the cells that are living within that space. Because a lot of those cells have to do with base emotion, have to do with pathology clearing, and the way we did this, or my specific project, was on cerebral amyloid angiopathy, which is a condition in which there's a gene that produces a protein, and this protein, whenever the gene has a mutation, is cleaved incorrectly, which makes a protein that is not soluble and that stays within the walls of the vessels. And that has been hypothesized to have to do with bleedings in the brain, with dementia, and with other vasculopathies. So, what I did in my specific project was to use these tools to see how the cells populations changed, and also how the vascular structures changed. Okie dokie. And so here you can see some videos of the in vivo cells and vessels. I need a break. Does anybody have any questions?
Not so far.
Okie dokie. But now I am in the Noel lab, and we are doing something completely different that I'm still trying to understand. But long story short, we're trying to understand perception, cognition, and action through mouse models and human studies. And I have also attached a QR code there if you're curious about it. I promise that maybe a few months from now, I will know way more about. But right now, we are in the process of setting up the lab, making sure the microscope is good, making sure how the setup is good so that we can start the science. So the big question, how have flexibility and accepting change helped my career and myself? Well, I think that if I had tried to really control all the things that were going on, whether that was moving from Mexico to the US, whether that was going to grad school, even though if I was not sure I wanted to go, or whether that was, just staying on my own lane and not saying, okay, I want more responsibility, I want a better title. Maybe I wouldn't be here where I really get to enjoy science and enjoy the process and have autonomy and have my own project and continue going to conferences because they haven't been able to go to Germany. I haven't been able to go to New York. I haven't been able to go to Chicago. So it's just one of those things in which like sometimes you're very, very set on something, and that's fair. It's good to be ambitious. It's good to have a goal. But sometimes if that goal is not a straight line, that is okay because it might lead you to something that you didn't even know you would enjoy more. But yeah, that's it for me. Um, and I'll take any questions.
Thank you so much, Maria. That was super informative and I learned a lot. So I'm going to give people the opportunity to unmute themselves or to write any questions that they might have in the chat. Feel free to do so. While we wait for some question, I have some of my own. So I guess what would you say has been the difference or the most significant challenges when transitioning from a laboratory at a hospital now to a laboratory in an academic setting? How are they similar, but how are they different too?
Hmm. They are very, very different. The thing is that whenever you're in a research institute, like for example, children's, and I don't know if this is the same for any institute, in all of the US or any other country or territory, things tend to be more centralized. So you tend to be in a department, which, that happens in universities and academic research too, but you have an administrative assistant, you have ordering places, you still have to apply for grants and get your own funding, but at least you also have the support of the institute and the community because you are a nonprofit, you're not a governmental institution. Like, for example, if you were to be in a public university like the University of Minnesota, and in those type of places, you also get a lot more people that are not necessarily in it for graduate school. Like you get a lot of people like me that are trying to build a career in science. You have programs for outreach in the summer. Um, and I feel like there's a lot less. You have to contact this person who has to contact that person who has to contact that person as in academia. Like in academia, there's a person for everything. And I feel like in institutes, there's a person that does all the things that don't like it's not like a chain. Um, it's also different in the sense of sometimes with institutes, it's a little harder to get equipment. Like you don't have as much autonomy with that because there's very strict guidelines of things that you can do on budgets that you can take because in those cases, the things that you purchase have to be good for all the department versus in academia, every lab has whatever they need to have as long as they have the funding. Um, in terms of people, I think it varies a lot. I think I have had a very different experience in every lab that I have been at. Um, so yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that also translates to pay. How much benefits and more pay do you have in the research institute rather in the university? I bet that those are very different too.
Yeah, in the research institute, there's definitely way more wiggle room. Um, because even though they have similar equity practices in which they have to compare your experience with everybody else in the department and with everybody else in the lab to determine how much you get or the type of title that you get whenever they're hiring. Um, you can, as I did, talk more to your PI or your boss or whatever it's called wherever you go. Um, And also you have assured yearly raises, assured benefits, assured um, things like wellness programs in which you will get a budget a year so that you can spend it on gym memberships or anything that will be good for your mental health. Um, versus in academia, I feel like it's definitely more reduced. And I feel in academia, it also depends on the tenure of the lab. If it's a lab that has been there for many years, they will most likely have a lot more money to use and to invest in people that will help the projects to grow. But if, for example, it's a new lab, it's very reduced budget. So that's something that you have to go in mind if you ever want to join a new lab because they have startup money, but they have to be very conservative of how they use it because they're barely starting to make a name for themselves. But neither is compared to, for example, industry. Industry is just like and with academia, it's like academia and institutes, at least with children's, it's a little bit more like this. So it's not crazy different, but there's definitely a difference.
Thank you. Yeah, that was super helpful. If anybody wants to raise their hand or unmute or type anything in the chat, if not, the other question that I had, since you have gotten this laboratory manager experience, did you end up liking the administrative side of things, or do you solely prefer the research aspect of it?
I did, but I think that's a very personal decision because I
Yeah.
know there's a lot of people that do not enjoy it. But
Mm-hmm.
for me, I think just the opportunity for example, organize a retreat was very cool. And sometimes I've had pondered at the, possibility of, oh, maybe I can get into scientific meeting organizations, sorry. So I actually enjoyed it. I think it also depends the PI you're working with because they might have a very different type of organization than you. And I feel like those have to be married to each other for it to work well. And at that point, I had known my boss for a year and a half, so I already knew how he worked, and I already kind of knew what he needed. So that really helped too. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, let me see. And if you could give yourself an advice when you started at it and in your bachelor's to, with all the knowledge and the experience and yeah, that you have now, what would you say and why?
Now knowing what I have learned, I think I wish I had known about rotational programs. But I feel like those pretty new, whether that is in institutes like the NIH or whether that is in industry, I feel like they would have been life changing because once you graduate and once you are not a student anymore, they don't really accept you. Like it's not, there's no kind of track for just a professional trying to get into their rotational programs. They want students or interns. Um, so maybe, looking into more possibilities that were not just academic research. Um, but again, I think just the pure shock of coming from Mexico to the US and just diving very, very deep instead of trying to really sit back and be patient and be like, okay, never mind. These are all the things. It's not just this path. I think that was definitely something that with more maturity, I'm like, okay, maybe you could have done it. But
Yeah.
but that's where what I am doing, what I'm doing now, which is taking it slow and really try to figure out what I want for myself with my career in science.
Yeah. And I think that that applies to everyone. We are still figuring it out and as we go along, and particularly students. So yeah. So I haven't seen any questions. The evaluation form is up, so we would really appreciate if you could give us your feedback. And with that, Maria, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. You taking the time to present your story and your experience, but also your knowledge and your background as a researcher. So I really appreciate it. So thank you so much. And with that, I am going to close off this webinar session today. Thank you so much for those who connected and for those who will view us online. Thank you so much for your support. We have next week, I think, on December 5th, we have Dr. Luis Valentin Alvarado from Monash University in Melbourne, in Australia, that he's going to give us a talk. So thank you so much for joining and have a great evening. Happy Thanksgiving.